Hey, it is Zennial Gamer back with the Monster Family. Oh man, I can't even say it with a straight face. So a lot of you guys have told me that you really enjoyed the videos I did about the Monster Family overviews. And I really got backtracked on this series. So I apologize, guys. We are reviving this series, and we're going to try and do a better job about bringing these videos out. So today we're going to be talking about the Sniper Monster Family. Now, for those of you who did not see this series because it was such a long time ago, these videos are basically designed to look at one entire monster family, kind of rate the monsters within the family, and then just give high-level overview suggestions on how I would use and rune them. We're not going into detail of any of the individual monsters, just more high-level stuff in order to do the entire monster family in one video. So with that said, let's jump straight into it. Today we're going to be doing the Sniper family. I think it's perfect timing with most of them having just been buffed. And we're going to start off with what I have as the lowest ranked within the Sniper family, which is Carbine. I have him at C tier. Now I will tell you, I think you can make a case for him to be B tier. I know he made an appearance at the SWC, but my whole concept on monsters are there are monsters that you win because of, monsters you win with, and monsters you win despite of. Now the monsters that you win despite of are the ones that, like, if you just give them these ridiculous runes and you spend all day theory crafting that perfect comp in order to win if everything goes right, you know, that's like a Christina. That's there's a lot of monsters like that. So Carbine is one of those types of monsters, and the reason for that is his passive. So he does have the ability to instantly steal an attack whenever he gets it hit with a glancing hit. And then when he steals that attack, he increases his attack power. Now the problem is there's not going to be any defense break or anything set up like that. So the skill 2 is the same on most of the snipers, which is the hidden aim, and it basically puts them into the hidden aim pose, increases the enemy's odds of landing a glancing hit by 70%, and then doubles their damage with the skill 1 when they come out of the hidden aim pose. So in the case of Carbine, if you put it all together, what this means is that he goes into the hidden aim pose, and then if he gets hit with a glancing hit, he will instantly take a turn with an attack power buff. So you can theory craft a comp that would work like this. For example, a monster like Innate, so you do like a speed lead Innate Carbine. You run the Carbine really slow in a Fat Lucian style Rage or Fatal set. Basically, the Innate goes first, is going to give you the instant attack bar boost on the Carbine so that he can get into the hidden aim pose, and then you just hope that the enemy glances. The problem with that is that it's still only a 70% chance to glance. Anytime you're relying on that level of RNG, it makes me uncomfortable, so I'm gonna rate the monster a little bit lower. You can actually improve those odds a little bit if you run a Molly in the comp. Then you're at 85% chance to glance, but even so, accuracy resistance, guys, we all know what 85% means, and if you're running him in that fat of a set, one hit that doesn't glance is probably going to kill him. So ultimately, I would not recommend building or using Carbine, but if you did, then my suggestion is to probably use him with 100% attack bar booster to get him into the hidden aim pose as fast as possible. Alternatively, you could just run him on like your fastest Fatal or Rage runes, and then run him with a speed lead and bring him in only against enemy bruiser teams where you know that your like really fast Fatal or Rage set will be enough to outspeed. I would put him in Revenge just to take advantage of the fact that all of his damage dealing comes out of his skill 1, and it does have a pretty good modifier. If you cannot put him in Will, obviously I would still recommend Will. And then part of his recent buff is this resistance lead and guild content. I will say that there is some synergy with this skill, simply because if you put him in a max res build, which means giving him 60 resistance and then using his lead, and you're trying to run him on a defense, now he's just that much harder to kill. But at that point, you still have to put him in a bruiser build to really take advantage of that. And his base stats are just too low for his overall kit to benefit from that bruiser build. Okay, next up, we have Dragunov, and almost everything I said about Carbine is going to apply to Dragunov. I do have him in B tier as opposed to C tier, just for a couple of small differences between the two. So the first one is that on Dragunov's passive, he is going to increase his attack bar and maintain hidden aim whenever he defeats an enemy. This ultimately is a little bit less reliant upon RNG, because you're no longer trying to steal that turn. You're going to build him a little bit tankier to begin with. You run him in a different type of comp, and that comp will usually involve like some AoE defense break and attack buffing, and it would allow him to kind of turn cycle. The other thing is he can benefit from being in like a multi-revenge build. So mine is double revenge will. You could also go triple revenge. Or you could do even like a violent rage or fatal revenge. So he's a little bit more flexible in his builds. Also, being an LD5, he does have slightly higher base stats. It is a little... Oh, wow. He is not an LD5, guys. I'm not even going to cut that out, man. That is the worst... He would legit be the worst LD5 in the game. He's almost the worst LD4. I mean, come on. Being an LD, not LD5, just being an LD, he is got better base stats than his elemental brothers, so he is a little bit easier to build. Ultimately, like I said, I would use him in more of a set. Mine is actually pretty slow, and he's not... I don't use him. Obviously, I don't use him at all. So he's in just kind of runes, like basically for content, to be honest. So if you actually did want to build him, use him. I would definitely try and build him faster so that he could get into that hidden aim pose more quickly. Because whereas with a monster like Carbine, when you're going to run that 100% attack bar booster, Dragunov can't give himself an attack power buff or a defense break, so he needs more setup monsters with him. Obviously, the Innate would give you the crit rate buff, so in both cases, if you're running like an Innate, you can build them to a lower crit rate, but again, with Dragunov, you kind of need that 100% crit rate because you don't get the elemental advantages as well, so... yeah, it's just a slightly different type of comp. Now again, I think you could probably argue that Dragunov should be C tier, you could argue that Carbine should be B tier. Ultimately, I think both of them are right on the verge between the B-C tier. I wouldn't recommend building either of them personally. I know there are some people out there who might be like, oh, my Dragunov's super fun! I mean, we all have monsters we like, but in terms of just like that win potential, Dragunov and Carbine, they're both monsters that you win despite of, in my opinion. Okay, next up we have Covenant. I have got Covenant in A tier, and honestly, this was probably the toughest choice of them all. Covenant, a lot of people would probably put in S tier, and I would not argue having him in S tier. Covenant is a very flexible monster. You can actually build him a couple of different ways, and he shines in either of the ways that you build him. The reason I ultimately put him in A tier is because I feel like there are enough other monsters that kind of do the same thing. He's unique, but he's not incredibly unique. Ultimately, he's an ignored defense monster with really high multipliers, and we have quite a few other alternatives to that. Bulldozer, Copper, Odin, if you happen to have Odin. I mean, there's a lot of monsters that are going to do high damage output, ignore defense. Covenant, obviously being a 4-star, lets him play in 4-star Special League, but outside of 4-star Special League, you won't see him much in RTA, where a monster like Odin you will, and even Bulldozer we've seen in the SWC Finals, and we've seen him win the SWC Finals. So yeah, I just don't feel like Covenant's kit is unique enough. Obviously, crazy high multiplier and a higher base attack, and most of the other monsters I mentioned, or several of the other monsters I mentioned, are going to scale off of other stats like defense. But at the end of the day, Covenant is a great monster. He's just not a unique monster. So for me, that was where I put him in A tier. So to take a quick look at Covenant's kit, the skill 3, his kit is actually pretty unique compared to his brothers with the ignore defense on the skill 3. So a lot of, most of them, or possibly all of them, I'd have to double check, have the skill 1 accurate fire. I didn't talk about this with Carbine and Dragunov, but they both have the same thing. It ignores all damage reduction effects. Now, this, a lot of us, including myself, will probably have made this mistake at some point or another. This is not ignore defense. We see ignore D, like the D on damage. I'm pointing at the screen like you guys can see. But we see the ignore D and we just like assume ignore defense. It does not ignore defense. It ignores damage reduction, which is like invincibility. It also bypasses shields, things like that. But the Covenant skill 3 actually is an ignore the target's defense. Now this skill can easily hit for in excess of 50,000 damage if you have him in a slow rage build like I've got him right here. I use Covenant, personally I mostly use him for the light Kairos, like farming light essence. But I did used to use him in a Kali Chloe Covenant auto win team. I actually do have a, I have a video on that one, so I'll put an info card on screen. But yeah, you can run Covenant in a really slow kind of auto win team in 4-star bases. The problem is the Vigor meta has mostly made that team outdated. It's really hard to use that team effectively in 4-star bases anymore. There's just too much anti-crit and things like that. Now, you can also run a Swift Covenant, or just a really fast Fatal or Rage. At that point, you're probably targeting more like 40,000 damage with him, but you're also getting that benefit of taking turn 1. His turn 2, or excuse me, his skill 2, will also strip beneficial effects. You see the 70% chance, but it actually goes up to 100 in skill ups. It's a 3-turn cooldown, and then it has damage scaling according to the number of effects you remove. It's actually a very useful skill, but it's more a useful skill for a longer fight. Again, a monster like Covenant, we're talking about just cleave, snipe type teams. Usually you're not going to play him in a longer fight, so even though this is a nice skill, it's not a particularly amazing skill for his kit. Now, in the recent buff, he was given attack power buff in guild content. This is huge, guys. This is huge. This legitimately boosts him up quite a bit. This by itself was almost enough for me to give him that S tier. At the end of the day, like I said, I couldn't give him the S tier because I don't feel like he's unique enough, but this is a really awesome leader skill for Covenant. It was a great buff for him. They also did a slight buff to the damage right here. So overall, I would recommend building your Covenant for sure. I would build him to use in either a Swift Snipe style team or a Slow Cleave team, something like the Kali Chloe Covenant. And then you can use him in 4-star Special League or 20-star Special Leagues as well. And then, obviously, I mentioned I use mine in the Light Hall of Heroes, so just a quick note for you guys. Double Lucian, they don't even have to be crazy fat Lucians, they just need 100 crit rate because the monsters are all really low HP. Double Lucian, Kali, and then Covenant. You can run them all super slow, high damage. That will run you about 13 seconds in the Light Essence Dungeon in Kairos. Maybe average 17 seconds, around there. Okay, next up we've got Carcano, who got pretty much the biggest buff out of all of the snipers in the last balance patch. Now, I've got Carcano as either A or S tier, kind of remains to be seen. I did put mine on a pretty decent rune set. It's not amazing, but it's strong. There's about but for my account standards. I know, I always get that in comments, guys. For my account standards, it's not like my highest efficiency set, but it is a high efficiency set. So I'm testing out a theory right here that Carcano will work as a bruiser. Now, his kit, let's start off with that. So Carcano's passive will decrease the defense of the enemy with the worst HP status for 2 turns at the start of each turn. The nice thing about this is, if you think about how Summoner's War AI works, if you, like Carcano obviously is going to by default target wind, but if the enemy with the lowest HP status is fire and Carcano defense breaks it, it will change his targeting. So although he's rarely going to target water, that monster would have to be like under 30% and defense broken for the AI to sometimes do it. He is going to target basically the other 4 elements with equanimity, which means he's a little bit harder to manipulate through the AI when you're attacking him as an offensive player. Another way to think about it is that he's going to be almost as random as a Theomars, or almost as random as a light or a dark monster. And I say almost just because he'll attack 4 of the 5 elements instead of all 5, but he can still attack any of those 4 at random based on whoever has the worst HP status. So, because he's harder for the AI to manipulate, I think he would work well in a longer fight. So my concept here was pretty much just to build him in a major bruiser comp, try to take advantage of the hidden aim, which is, again, most of the snipers have this hidden aim, so that's 70% glancing opportunity. In this case, we built him a little bit faster. He is on Violent Will for defense purposes. Should be a little bit harder to snipe. I've got him on a defense with Vigor and Molly, much faster Vigor. And then, of course, in the recent buff, he did get a speed lead, so it makes that team a little bit harder to Lucian, a little bit harder to snipe. To be honest, so far that team is not doing well. I think it's 0-3, and you know, that's not the record you want. Vigor does also have one of my highest quality rune sets. So the early returns are that he's not that amazing on siege defense, but we will see. I think he's going to be tested out by a lot of different guilds. In the meantime, even for offensive purposes, I do really like him in the bruiser build. And I know his kit seems very similar to Carbine and Dragunov, who I talked really low on earlier. But there's 2 big differences. The speed lead is obviously a huge deal for him. And then the fact that he's going to give you that defense break makes it easier to build comps with him. Whereas the Dragunov, the Dragunov doesn't do any kind of buffing whatsoever. The Carbine will steal the turn with an attack buff, but The problem with that is that you can steal a turn out of sequence, like before you've landed a defense break. If the enemy cuts you and hits you, then you steal the turn and there's no setup for you. So the Carcano allows you to control your turn sequencing a lot better, which makes him a lot more reliable, a lot less, reliant upon RNG. So I feel like Carcano is definitely in a much better, much more usable monster in a much better position than the other two snipers with similar kits. Ultimately, I think he's going to wind up in A tier, but there is a possibility that he'll be S tier. He may actually wind up being not quite as good as Covenant, or he may wind up being slightly better than Covenant, but I think the two of them are pretty close, and I think the two of them are both somewhere like in the high A tier or possibly low S tier. I do really like the concept of the Bruiser build. I don't know if this is going to be effective, but for what it's worth, guys, when you look at this build, I know we have no crit damage. This was run through the optimizer. This build will do about 35,000 damage. Now that's he's got some additional damage through his artifacts as well. But yeah, this build will do a little between like 35 and 38,000 damage with no attack buff, but on a defense break. If he's been hit while he was in his hidden aim, because you get it's basically, and I did test this, so the 200% boosted damage actually means 300% of total damage. So with that 300% total damage, this build would normally do about 12,000 damage, and then you triple it. So this Bruiser build right here is still a major damage dealing build. I think he could work really well with a Fran, for example, just really simple, straightforward, like 3-star Fran, right? That gives you the attack buff, that gives you the sustain. You could probably actually run like a Carcano Fran Triana. That would probably be an incredibly effective team, as long as you didn't bring it into like triple water or something where they're all hammering down on Carcano. Okay, and last up, we have got Magnum. Now, you'll see that I've got Magnum as high S tier. I know this is kind of like semantics, guys. I can't call him double S because it's so rare that you get to use him. But I feel like he's better than most monsters in S because when you do use him, he's amazing. So let's talk about his kit to start off with. The passive is basically what makes him amazing. So Magnum's passive will increase attack bar by 25% whenever an enemy gains a beneficial effect from a skill. Now, what this means is that if you bring him in against the Bastet, for example, Bastet applies 2 buffs to every monster on the team. So let's say you're in Arena or in RTA. Bastet applies 8 buffs. Magnum gains 200% attack bar. That means he basically attacks instantly regardless of how slow he is. So you can see my Magnum here at plus 53. It's just the way the runes broke out. My RTA Magnum's like plus 22. Just genuinely doesn't need that much speed. What he needs is as much attack, crit rate, crit damage as you can give him. He does need some accuracy though. So the kicker with Magnum, his big drawback is his damage is really, really low. He basically can only kill 2 cleave style monsters in the game with any consistency. That's going to be Julie and Lucian. Outside of Julie and Lucian, I don't trust him to kill anything. Even like a Mina, he can almost never manage to kill like a Mina. And then when you get into the snipe style monsters like Daphnis or Odin, their base stats are simply too high. There's no way Magnum can one-shot them. The reason for that is because he doesn't get to set up. If he doesn't get set up by anybody. So if he cuts in on the enemy team, there's no defense break, there's no attack buff, so he has to one-shot something in order to really fulfill his role. Now, if we look at the suppressive fire, we looked at this skill earlier with Covenant, it's the exact same skill, so he strips the beneficial effects on the enemy, 100% chance if you look down at the harmful effects, but we do go through an accuracy resistance check, and then the damage scales according to the number of beneficial effects removed. So if you strip 2 beneficial effects, you will almost always kill a Lucian or a Julie. Other than that, I can't get my Magnum, like even in my fattest fat Lucian set, I can't get him to consistently kill any other monsters. Now, that sounds very limited. He's one monster that literally only counts 2 monsters, but he counts 2 extremely high meta monsters that you will see in Special League, you'll see in RTA, you will see in Arena, you will even occasionally see it on a siege offense, on a siege defense. Anytime you see a monster that applies double buffs, so like Bastet does shield and attack, Wusa does shield and immunity. Anytime you see a monster that applies 2 buffs per monster to the entire team, you can bring Magnum in to instantly cut and steal a turn. And if that monster is paired with a Julie or a Lucian, you can snipe out the Julie or the Lucian and you can win. Now, Magnum will not cut, like, if the enemy monster only applies 1 buff, unless you're running like a really swift, really fast Magnum, he's not going to gain enough attack bar to boost. So it is important to make sure that the enemy has 2 debuffs. Excuse me, that the enemy applies 2 buffs. Ultimately, though, Magnum is going to be a force ban for you anytime your opponent is running a Julie Lucian Cleave. And knowing that you have Magnum, and they don't know you have Magnum, allows you, and now I'm talking about RTA and Special League, allows you to take whatever 4 anti-cleave monsters you want. So if you have Magnum as a back pocket pick, you can pick the next 4 best anti-cleave monsters you have, and then you're pretty much guaranteed those 4 monsters because you pick Magnum last, and he's a force ban, and then you get the win. Or they let him through, and then you also get the win unless he misses his accuracy resistance check the 15% of the time. So for that reason alone, just because of how incredibly powerful he is, situational, but powerful he is in Special League and RTA, we've got to give him a really high rank. And then again, you will find him occasionally useful on Arena offense or on Siege offense when you see those Julie Lucian defenses there as well. But so that's it for today's video, guys. As always, I appreciate you watching. I hope you found it useful. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you turn that like button blue, and we'll see you on the next one. Have a good one, guys. Hey guys, if you're still with me to this point, then that means that you probably liked the video, found it entertaining, or even better, both. So please smash the like button, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment down below, because those things help the channel grow, and more importantly, they show me that the video is useful, and that's the whole reason I do this in the first place.